It's been months now since my mom, Angel, passed away, and yet there are still mornings when the grief presses down on me so hard I can barely breathe. Sometimes it feels like everyone else has moved on, but I'm still stuck under the weight of missing her. I loved her deeply, more than I could ever put into words. Still, there was always this ache inside me, this sense that I was somehow invisible next to my older sister, Margaret. She was the one Mom seemed to orbit around, her favorite, or at least that's how it looked from where I stood. I'm Rebecca, 27, an artist clinging to small commissions and side jobs, never quite able to make ends meet. I never craved attention, never wanted the center stage, but lately I keep turning over the thought. Maybe that's exactly why Mom always gravitated toward Margaret. Maybe she needed someone to shine for, someone who fit the picture she wanted to see. Margaret's life just worked. She married young, landed a steady job, moved into a big house with a wraparound porch and a golden retriever in the yard. Everything about her seemed effortless, as if the universe itself wanted her to succeed. Meanwhile, Mom would dote on her, defend her against any criticism, overlook her mistakes, praise her every step. I was the one in the background, picking up after the family's messes, making sure bills got paid, groceries made it home, the basics held together. I don't think Mom ever noticed how much I did, or how much I hurt, always trying to prove I mattered too. The last few months before Mom moved out of her old house were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. I remember packing up boxes, wrapping up plates and photo frames, sorting through a lifetime of memories while Margaret breezed in and out, barely breaking a sweat. At one point, as I was hauling a heavy box of Mom's clothes to the car, Margaret appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, eyebrow arched. "Why are you always so dramatic, Rebecca?" she said, her voice dripping with annoyance. She was talking about my insistence on labeling every box, making sure nothing got lost. But really, she was talking about everything. My tears, my worries, my need for things to feel right. I tried to keep my voice steady as I answered, "She's not just anyone, Margaret. She's our mom, and that roof you're giving her is a guest house you barely touch, and you're charging her rent for it." Generosity isn't exactly the word I'd use. Margaret rolled her eyes, completely unmoved. "Do you know how many people would love a setup like this? She's lucky to have me." The word lucky hit me like a slap, and I couldn't stop myself. I laughed, bitter and sharp, the sound bouncing off the bare walls. "You mean she's lucky I'm here doing all the work while you get to play the hero?" Margaret just shrugged and disappeared back into her big house, leaving me alone with my anger and a growing sense of disbelief. That was the pattern. She always did the minimum, then acted like she deserved a standing ovation for showing up. And I was left holding everything together, never getting any credit, just more responsibility. The night we got the diagnosis, my hands were shaking so badly I thought I'd drop the phone. "Margaret, it's bad," I said, my voice trembling. "It's lymphoma. The doctor gave her 6 months to a year, maybe less." For a moment, there was only silence. Then Margaret's voice came through, flat and matter-of-fact. "Well, that sucks. But at least she has her little house here. That's something, right?" I gripped the phone until my knuckles went white. "That's all you have to say? That sucks?" "She's dying, Margaret. Dying," she bristled. "What do you want me to do, Rebecca? Drop everything and play nursemaid? I have a job, a family, a life." I felt heat rising in my chest. Maybe just show some compassion. Take her to a doctor's appointment. Just be with her. She's still our mom. Margaret sighed, loud and exasperated, as if I'd asked her to move a mountain. "I'm doing what I can. Don't make this about you, okay?" There was no point in arguing. Margaret always managed to turn things around, to cast herself as the victim of my drama. I hung up before I said something I'd regret, but the words kept echoing in my head. After Mom started chemo, she got too weak to keep up with her bills. Margaret insisted she should manage Mom's finances since I was too busy with my painting. I didn't like it, but Mom trusted her, so I swallowed my doubts. Maybe, I thought, this would be the moment Margaret finally stepped up. Maybe she'd prove me wrong. Then one afternoon, Mom called me over. She looked so small, curled up in her armchair, her skin stretched tight over her bones. "Rebecca, can you go by the bank for me?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I want to be sure I have enough for the next few months." "Of course, Mom," I said, smoothing her hair back with a trembling hand. "Don't worry. I'll check everything." I drove to the bank, expecting a routine visit. But when I saw the account summary, my heart dropped into my stomach. The balance was almost zero. Mom's little nest egg, what she'd saved after selling her car, was gone. I scanned through the statement, and there it was, a massive withdrawal, signed by Margaret Bennett. For a moment, I just stood there numb. It had to be some kind of mistake. Margaret was careless, sure, but she wasn't cruel. She wouldn't steal from Mom. Not now, not when she needed it most. But the paper was right there, black and white, impossible to deny. My hands shaking, I stepped outside into the sharp winter air and dialed Margaret's number. She answered, her voice casual, like it was any other day. "What's up?" she said, as if nothing could possibly be wrong. My throat was dry. "Margaret, why did you take all of Mom's money?" There was a pause, and then she went on the defensive, her tone hardening. "Rebecca, calm down. It's not what you think. Not what I think. The account is empty, Margaret. There's a withdrawal for the full amount, with your name on it. Are you going to tell me that's a coincidence?" She sighed as if I was being unreasonable. "It was just a loan, okay? I needed the money for some repairs around here. I was going to put it back. Mom doesn't need it right now anyway. Everything's covered." "A loan?" My voice cracked. "You took every cent she had without asking her, without telling me. She's sick, Margaret. That money was all she had left." "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Rebecca," she barked back. "I'll pay it back. You're acting like I stole it. You always blow things out of proportion." It was like talking to a wall. Margaret had always been able to justify anything to herself, bend the truth until it fit her needs. I realized then that she wasn't going to see what she'd done. Not really. She'd just keep taking, keep excusing, keep letting me be the one who picked up the pieces. I stood out in the cold, the phone pressed to my ear, feeling the weight of it all settle over me. Mom's illness, Margaret's carelessness, my own helplessness. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her see what she was doing. But all I could do was listen to Margaret's voice, smooth and untroubled, as she explained away the hurt she'd caused, and wonder if I'd ever be able to forgive her, or myself, for letting it happen. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, my voice low and shaky, each word trembling with disbelief. "Mom is dying and you seriously think I'm just being dramatic? You're actually disgusting, Margaret." My hands were shaking, knuckles white as I gripped the phone tighter, desperate for some anchor, some way to keep myself from unraveling. "You have no idea the damage you've caused, do you? Mom asked me to check her account because she was worried about paying for her groceries." "Groceries, Margaret. Something so basic, so essential, and you took that away from her. Do you even grasp how humiliating it would be for her to find out she's been left with nothing?" "She won't find out," Margaret shot back, her words clipped, her tone icy. "That's because you're not going to tell her." My stomach twisted, a sickening churn at the audacity in her voice. "Why wouldn't I tell her, Margaret? She deserves to know what's been happening behind her back, especially now." "You've crossed a line. It'll only stress her out," Margaret interrupted, voice like a blade. "Do you really want to pile that on when she's already dealing with enough? I'll put the money back before she even notices. You always act like I'm the villain, Rebecca. But I'm the one holding everything together. I'm trying to keep this family afloat." Holding everything together? I could barely keep myself from screaming. It took everything I had not to let my anger boil over. "You mean dumping all the hard parts on me while you get to play perfect daughter? You mean letting me handle Mom's pain and fear while you sweep in with empty gestures? Don't you dare act like you're the only one making sacrifices," she spat, her voice dropping to a hiss. "If you care about Mom, you'll let this go. Stop trying to make me the bad guy just because she trusted me with her money." Something inside me snapped. I couldn't listen to another word. My hand moved almost on its own, hanging up the phone. I stood there, chest tight and heart racing, feeling as if the whole world was pressing down on me. The traffic on the street moved in slow motion, the ordinary world oblivious to the chaos cracking inside me. Margaret wanted to twist this around, to pretend that stealing from Mom was some kind of kindness, a secret favor. But all I could see was betrayal, and the knowledge that telling Mom would break her spirit in a way I couldn't bear to imagine. The thought of adding to her pain made me physically ill. I needed to talk to someone, anyone, just to make sense of the storm in my mind. Without thinking, I dialed Laura. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm, layers of concern already woven through. "Hey, Rebecca, how are you?" she asked, immediately sensing something was wrong, as she always did. "It's Margaret," I managed, my voice catching in my throat. The whole story poured out. The missing money, Margaret's cold response, her shameless justification. By the time I finished, Laura's breathing had quickened, the tension in her silence unmistakable. "She took everything?" Laura said, disbelief and anger mixing in her words. "And she expects you to just keep it quiet? That's not just irresponsible, Rebecca. That's cruel." "It's a loan," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "She's acting like she's protecting Mom by lying to her, like this is all for her own good." Laura took a moment before responding, her voice steady even as I could hear the frustration beneath it. "Rebecca, she's manipulating you. What if she doesn't pay it back? Your mom is relying on you to look out for her, to make sure she's safe. This isn't something you can just ignore." "I know," I whispered, rubbing my forehead with a trembling hand. "But if I tell Mom, it'll destroy her. Margaret knows that. She's using it to keep me quiet." "Of course she is," Laura replied sharply. "She's counting on your kindness, twisting it into a weapon against you. But someone has to stand up to her. Someone has to show her that this theft can't just be swept under the rug." A heavy silence stretched between us. I slumped onto my couch, feeling the weight of it all settle into my bones. "I don't know how," I admitted. "Margaret never listens to me. She never has. And George, her smug, insufferable husband, he always takes her side, always acts like I'm the problem." I hesitated, but Laura pressed on. "George knows, doesn't he?" "He must," I said quietly. "He's always in on it with her. You should have seen them when Mom moved into their guest house, acting like they were doing her this huge favor. They basked in the praise, but all they care about is how it looks to everyone else." Laura's voice softened. "You're not alone, Rebecca. I'll help you in any way I can, but you can't let them keep you trapped like this. You have a right to stand your ground." Her words offered a glimmer of hope, the faintest sense of support, but mostly I just felt trapped, caught between the urge to protect Mom and the need to confront Margaret. The idea of shattering Mom's fragile peace was unbearable, but so was the thought of letting Margaret get away with it. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and guilt. I couldn't look at Mom without feeling the sting of betrayal, even though she had no idea. She'd thank me for helping her with dinner, smile as I sat beside her during treatments, trusting me completely. Every time her eyes met mine, I felt the words pressing at my lips, but they never came out. The truth was a boulder I couldn't move. Margaret made things worse with every smug encounter. A few days later, I was at Mom's house, sorting through a mountain of medical bills, when Margaret breezed in, exuding confidence. George trailed behind, silent and self-satisfied. Carrying grocery bags, he dropped loudly onto the counter, as if to announce some great deed. "Look at this," Margaret exclaimed, holding up a bouquet of cheap supermarket flowers, her voice syrupy sweet. I thought these might brighten up the place. "Don't you think, Mom?" Mom's face lit up, gratitude shining in her tired eyes. "Oh, Margaret, that's so thoughtful of you." I bit down on my tongue until I tasted blood. Thoughtful, if only she knew. I focused on the paperwork, trying to steady my hands, trying not to scream. George caught my eye and gave me a pointed, smug little smile, as if daring me to say something, as if he knew exactly how powerless I felt. As the day wore on, the tension in the house was suffocating. Margaret fluttered around, showing off her small, easy gestures, basking in Mom's praise. I could barely speak, afraid that if I opened my mouth I'd unleash everything I'd been holding back. Instead, I watched her perform, watched George lean against the counter, arms folded, watching me with quiet satisfaction. That night I sat alone in my apartment, unable to sleep. The walls seemed to close in around me, thick with all the things I couldn't say. I replayed Margaret's words, George's smirk, Mom's innocent gratitude. I realized that silence was its own kind of betrayal, one I was being forced into. But I also knew that I wasn't alone, not entirely. Laura's promise echoed in my mind. Maybe together we could find a way forward. Maybe I could be stronger than Margaret's manipulation, stronger than my own fear. I just had to figure out how. You should really take a page from Margaret Rebecca. She's always thinking of others. That was it for me. The words echoed in my mind like an accusation, sharp and unfair. I slammed the papers down onto the table, the sound slicing through the quiet like a warning, and shot to my feet. Thinking of others? Are you kidding me? My voice shook with anger, but for once I didn't care if anyone saw how much it hurt. Rebecca, Mom said, her voice suddenly gentle, concern flickering in her eyes. Her hand stilled in the middle of folding laundry, a pile of faded shirts between us. What's wrong? Nothing, I muttered, trying to pull myself together, swallowing back the tears that threatened to spill over. Just remembered something I need to do. I snatched my coat from the chair and made for the door, barely able to contain the storm inside me. I couldn't stand to be in the same room with Margaret and George another second, not with their smug faces and their endless casual cruelty. As I stepped out, Margaret's voice trailed behind me, low and mocking, meant for George but loud enough for me to hear. She's always so dramatic. The next morning, desperate to clear my head, I offered to run errands in town, anything to get away, to give myself space to breathe. The weather was cold and gray, the kind that seemed to seep into your bones, but I welcomed the bite of it on my cheeks. I wandered down Main Street, half focused on the grocery list crumpled in my pocket, the other half lost in anxious thoughts about Mom, her pale face, the way she counted every dollar at the grocery store, the tightening lines of worry that Margaret never seemed to see. Then I saw her, Margaret, stepping out of one of the town's fanciest boutiques, the kind of place I'd never even set foot in. She was laughing, her voice bright as she chatted with an eager sales assistant who hovered at her elbow, offering compliments and packages. George stood beside her, one hand on the door, his other arm already loaded down with glossy shopping bags, each one stamped with a store logo that screamed luxury. I froze, my stomach twisting into knots. There she was, acting like royalty, blowing who knows how much money on clothes or jewelry or whatever she thought she needed this week. Meanwhile, back home, Mom was pinching pennies, making casseroles stretch an extra day, worrying over every bill. I couldn't help it. I pictured Margaret's name on that withdrawal slip, remembered the sick feeling in my gut when I saw the balance in Mom's account drop overnight. My hands curled into fists before I even realized I'd moved. I stormed across the street, anger burning away my hesitation. "Margaret!" I called out, my voice sharp and louder than I intended. She flinched, startled, her easy smile faltering as she recognized me. "Oh, Rebecca," she managed, her tone laced with fake surprise. "Out shopping too?" "Shopping," I spat, glaring at the bags dangling from her arms. "What are you even doing here, Margaret? Spending more of Mom's money?" Her face went tight for a split second, a flash of guilt or annoyance, but then she recovered, slipping back into her usual mask. She forced a tight, perfect smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. "Don't be ridiculous. This is my money," she said, her voice cold and dismissive. "George and I work hard, Rebecca. Not that you'd understand." George let out a snort beside her, clearly enjoying the scene. "Careful, Rebecca," he said, smugness oozing from every word. "Jealousy doesn't look good on you." "Jealous?" I laughed, but it came out bitter, edged with all the things I'd never said. "No, Margaret, I'm not jealous. I'm disgusted. You drained Mom's account, and now you're parading around town buying designer clothes like nothing happened. How do you even sleep at night?" Margaret's eyes narrowed, her smile vanishing as she stepped closer. "I told you, it's a loan, and if you care about Mom, you'll drop it. You want her to know about this. You want her to worry about something she doesn't need to?" I stared at her, chest heaving, the cold air burning in my lungs. "You're unbelievable. Mom deserves to know the truth. She deserves better than you." Margaret leaned in, her words like poison, each syllable deliberate and cruel. "You tell her, and you'll break her heart. She's already sick, Rebecca. Do you really want to be the reason she gets worse? Think about that before you say a word." I stood there, rooted to the spot, furious at her nerve, at her endless ability to twist everything to her advantage. And suddenly, all these memories crashed over me at once. Evidence of just how long Margaret had been getting away with this, how much Mom had let slide in the name of love and family. When we were kids, Margaret could get away with anything. She had this charm that blinded people, especially Mom. She'd take money from Mom's purse for concert tickets or new shoes, always telling herself it was just a loan, that she'd pay it back. Mom would find out, of course, she always did. But instead of punishment, there'd just be a sigh, a gentle shake of the head, and a soft, "Oh, Margaret, you should have just asked." That was it. No consequences, just instant forgiveness handed over as if it cost nothing. Even as we grew up, nothing changed. The mistakes got bigger, but so did the excuses. There was the time Margaret borrowed Mom's car without asking, took it out for a joyride, and crashed it into a stop sign. She cried, blamed a pothole, and somehow, by the end of the day, Mom was the one comforting her. "Cars can be fixed," Mom said, her arms wrapped around Margaret, "but you can't replace family." I remember sitting on the stairs, numb with disbelief, watching Margaret hide her smile behind her tears. Mom's heart was just too big. She always believed the best in people, especially in Margaret. "She's your sister, Rebecca," Mom would say whenever I tried to bring up Margaret's behavior, her lies, her manipulations, the way she took advantage of Mom's kindness. "She's not perfect, but she means well." I hated that phrase. It always felt like a door slamming in my face, a way of brushing everything under the rug, no matter how much it hurt. But this time was different. Margaret wasn't a child anymore. This wasn't some harmless mistake or a lapse in judgment. This was calculated, deliberate, a betrayal, plain and simple. She'd looked at Mom's vulnerability and seen an opportunity. She'd taken money that Mom needed for medicine, for bills, for groceries, and spent it on herself without a second thought. It was cruel. It was unforgivable. And yet, deep down, a voice whispered that if Mom found out, she'd still forgive Margaret. That's just who Mom is. A sweet, selfless person who refuses to see the worst in the people she loves, even when they hurt her over and over again. Margaret and George, though, are nothing like Mom. They measure people by one thing: money. To them, your worth is written in the balance of your bank account, in the brands you wear, in the car you drive. If you're not rich, you're invisible. I've watched them brush off neighbors, co-workers, even family members who didn't fit their narrow idea of success. They never noticed the loneliness in Mom's eyes, the exhaustion on her face after a long day of stretching every dollar. They only saw what they wanted and they took it. There was this one time a few months ago that stuck with me. Mom had invited Mrs. Hathaway, the elderly widow from down the street, over for tea. Mrs. Hathaway was always kind, always dropping off fresh-baked bread or little handmade gifts, always looking out for Mom in her quiet way. That day, she showed up in her worn-out cardigan, her slippers barely holding together, but her face bright with gratitude. Mom set out her best tea set, the one she saved for special occasions, and made cucumber sandwiches and lemon bars, determined to make Mrs. Hathaway feel welcome. But when Margaret and George arrived unexpectedly and saw Mrs. Hathaway sitting at the kitchen table, Margaret barely acknowledged her. She glanced at her, nose wrinkling at the threadbare sleeves, then turned away, launching into a story about her weekend in the city, her new shoes, her latest work success. George eyed the old woman with thinly veiled contempt, drumming his fingers on the counter until she finished her tea and excused herself. When Mrs. Hathaway left, Margaret rolled her eyes and whispered, "Why do you waste time with people like that, Mom? She's got nothing." That's how they are. Always measuring, always judging, never seeing the real value in people. And Mom, for all her kindness, just smiled and said, "Because kindness doesn't cost anything, Margaret. Maybe one day you'll understand." But watching them, I wondered if they ever would. Now, standing on Main Street, watching Margaret cradle her designer bags and stare me down, I felt a cold certainty settle in my chest. Margaret would never change. George would never change, and Mom, despite everything, would probably forgive them if she knew the truth. But I couldn't, not anymore. This time the damage was too deep, and I wasn't sure forgiveness was even possible. George didn't even try to hide how disgusted he was, his lip curled at the smallest provocation, his eyes darting away like he couldn't bear the sight of us, as if our presence somehow contaminated the air. Later, after everyone else had gone, Margaret pulled me aside in the hallway, her voice low and sharp. "Why does Mom even bother talking to people like that? What could they possibly have that she needs?" There was a sneer in her tone, a kind of casual cruelty that made my skin crawl. It made me sick to realize how easily she dismissed others, how she measured worth by something so shallow and fleeting. The worst part was knowing that Margaret and George's own so-called success was nothing but a facade. They put on a brave face, but underneath it all, they were teetering on the edge, drowning in debts they refused to acknowledge, always borrowing just to keep their heads above water. They refinanced the house over and over, maxed out credit cards, took out loans with friendly smiles and empty promises, anything to keep up appearances, to maintain the illusion that they were thriving. One night, after too much wine and a failed attempt at laughter, Margaret let her guard down and confessed just how dire things really were. "It's just temporary. George's investments will pay off soon," she said, waving her hand as if brushing away a cloud of worry. She tried to laugh it off, flashing that brittle smile, but I saw the fear behind her eyes. The thing is, those investments never did pay off. The money never came. That's what people like Margaret and George never understood. Image can't save you from reality. They cared more about what people thought, the fancy cars in the driveway, the designer clothes carefully chosen for every occasion, the lawn manicured to perfection, than anything real or meaningful. It didn't matter if they were breaking under the strain, as long as the neighbors thought they were doing just fine. Now, seeing Margaret use Mom's hard-earned savings to prop up that crumbling illusion made me physically ill. Every time she flashed a new handbag or scheduled another spa day, I saw the years of sacrifice behind it. The car Mom sold when times were tight, the evenings she spent poring over bills, the coupons carefully clipped and saved. Mom had worked for every penny she'd ever had, never asked for handouts, always choosing the sensible path even when it meant going without. She deserved so much more than to see her life's work squandered on Margaret's shallow performance. At first, Mom's decline was barely noticeable. Little things like forgetting where she put her glasses or skipping breakfast. She'd say she was just tired, but I saw the way she moved slower, the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was watching. As the weeks stretched into months, her energy faded further. She needed more rest, and her laughter, once so strong and infectious, grew softer, almost hesitant. Some days, it felt like the vibrant woman I'd always known was slipping away, piece by piece, leaving only a fragile shadow behind. I tried to be strong for her, to keep everything running, but the reality was relentless. Caring for her took everything I had. My own life shrank to fit around her needs, and every conversation with Margaret turned into a battle. Over money, over care schedules, over who did more or cared more. The pressure was suffocating, a constant weight on my chest that never let up. After another argument with Margaret, voices raised and tempers frayed, Laura pulled me aside into the kitchen. She spoke with a kindness I hadn't realized I'd been missing. "Rebecca, you're burning out. You're doing everything for everyone, and it's not sustainable. You need to take care of yourself, too. Why don't you take a couple hours? Go to that yoga class you always talk about." Her words sounded almost foreign, like a language I'd forgotten. I hesitated, torn between guilt and exhaustion. Mom was having a quiet day, peacefully napping in her room, and Margaret, after much prodding, had promised to stay close by. The idea of stepping away even for an hour felt both terrifying and thrilling. Just this once I told myself I could let go. I left my phone in my bag, silent for the first time in months, and walked out the door. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could actually breathe. I moved through the yoga poses with a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. The studio was warm and quiet. The instructor's voice a gentle reminder that I was allowed to exist outside of worry and responsibility. For an hour or two, I wasn't a caretaker or a referee. I was just Rebecca. But when class ended and I reached for my phone, dread washed over me. 6 missed calls from Margaret. My hands shook as I unlocked the screen, and the last voicemail sent a chill through my entire body. "Rebecca, it's Mom." Margaret's voice was strained, trembling with accusation. "She's gone. I don't know where you were, but you should have been here." The drive home was a blur, a nightmare I couldn't wake from. My mind replayed the voicemail over and over, each word cutting deeper. When I walked through the door, everything felt wrong. Margaret sat on the couch, red-faced, eyes swollen, grief mixed with something sharper. She looked up at me, lips pressed into a hard line. "She just stopped breathing," she said, voice flat. I was here, but there was nothing I could do. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My heart felt shattered, grief and guilt warring inside me. I had only been gone for 2 hours, just 2 hours, and I missed the most important goodbye of my life. Mom died in that little guest house, with Margaret by her side and me nowhere to be found. The guilt was suffocating, crushing me from the inside out. "You should have been here," Margaret said, her voice icy and unforgiving. "I don't know why you thought yoga was more important than Mom. She needed you, Rebecca." Her words sliced through me, raw and merciless. I wanted to scream, to throw every accusation back at her, to remind her of all the ways she had failed. But I couldn't. The grief was too heavy, the guilt too consuming. All I could do was sit there, tears streaming down my face, as the reality of loss settled in. The day of Mom's funeral arrived with a sky the color of slate, the cold biting through my coat and into my bones. Mom had always found comfort in her faith, so we gathered at her church, sunlight filtering through stained glass to paint soft rainbows on the pews. The organ played quietly, each note echoing with sorrow. I sat up front, gripping a tissue in one hand and a photo of Mom in the other, desperate to hold on to something real, something solid in the midst of so much pain. My heart ached, not only with grief, but with the weight of everything that had led us here. Margaret and George arrived late, of course, sweeping down the aisle as if the service were their stage. Margaret wore a fitted black dress, every detail immaculate, her pearls gleaming against her neck. George looked smug, his suit tailored perfectly, his expression unreadable. It was as if they were playing roles in a drama, more concerned with appearances than with the woman we were mourning. The way they held themselves, heads high and backs straight, you'd think the funeral was an inconvenience, a mere formality before returning to their curated lives. As they took their seats at the front, I heard the whispers begin. People turned to each other, voices low but insistent, eyes flicking toward me with barely disguised judgment. I tried to lose myself in the memory of Mom's smile, to focus on the photograph in my hands, but the words found their way through. Rebecca wasn't even there when Angel passed. Margaret said she was off doing yoga. The contempt in their voices was unmistakable, each syllable a fresh wound. I clenched my fists, nails biting into my palms, wishing I could disappear. Margaret had made sure everyone saw me as the selfish daughter, the one who abandoned her mother in her final moments. She controlled the narrative, painting herself as the devoted caretaker and me as the one who failed. I wanted to defend myself, to set the record straight, but the weight of grief and guilt left me silent. All I could do was sit there, surrounded by judgment and sorrow, and mourn not only for Mom, but for everything that had been lost along the way. I was the one everyone blamed, the daughter who vanished when Mom needed me most. Even now, sitting in this cold, echoing church, I could feel the weight of blame pressing on me like a physical thing. The glances darting across the pews weren't just looks, they were accusations, silent verdicts handed down by people who only knew half the story. To them, I was the selfish one, the prodigal who ran when things got hard. That narrative had stuck, adhesive and relentless, and I wore it like a brand. Margaret slipped in beside me, her movements deliberate. I caught a whiff of her perfume. Sharp, floral, a little too sweet, like she'd poured it on to cover something sour beneath. She gave me a smile, lips pressed tight, eyes as cold as winter glass. "You okay, Rebecca?" she whispered, her words slick as honey but laced with poison. "I know this must be hard for you. Not being there for her, I mean." Her tone was a knife wrapped in velvet. I kept my gaze locked forward, jaw clenched. I wouldn't let her see me flinch, wouldn't let her savor any hint of weakness. I'd lived with her brand of kindness too long to fall for it now. At the front, the priest began to speak, his voice rising and falling through the cavernous sanctuary, filling the air with memories that felt both real and unreal. He painted Mom as a saint, gentle, devoted, her life a litany of sacrifice. He spoke of her faith, her patience, the deep love she poured into her family. Every word twisted inside me, because I knew the truth hidden beneath that surface. The exhaustion, the loneliness, the moments when her smile faltered behind closed doors. Still, when he spoke of her devotion to us, her daughters, tears stung at the corners of my eyes. If only he knew how complicated love could be. As the eulogy softened, the priest's words became almost conspiratorial, as if he were confiding in us alone. Angel was a remarkable woman, he said, his eyes sweeping across the mourners. She loved deeply, forgave endlessly, and carried a quiet strength that inspired everyone around her. On my last visit with her, just days before she passed, she gave me something precious. A letter. The church seemed to pause in unison. My breath snagged in my throat. A letter? I flicked a glance at Margaret, whose posture had turned rigid, her confidence suddenly brittle. George, her husband, just looked puzzled, his brow furrowed, but not yet concerned. As for me, a tight, anxious knot coiled in my stomach, anticipation and dread wrestling inside me. She asked me to read it today, the priest continued, holding up a sealed envelope, the wax unbroken and solemn as a promise. It was her final wish, and she made me swear to honor it. A hush swept the sanctuary, so complete that the faintest sigh seemed to echo. The priest broke the seal with steady hands, carefully unfolding the paper within. My heart thudded in my chest, loud, frantic, terrified of what might be revealed. To everyone gathered here today, he began, his voice carrying just enough. Thank you for coming to celebrate my life. I lived with as much love and faith as I could, and though my days were not always easy, I leave this world grateful. But before I go, there's something I must say, something that's weighed on me, that I cannot let remain in the shadows. Every ear strained to catch her words. The air was thick with anticipation, the entire congregation leaning forward, hungry for the secret about to be spoken. I've always believed in forgiveness, the priest read, his tone grave and unwavering. But forgiveness does not erase the truth. And the truth is, in my final months, I suffered a betrayal so deep, it nearly broke my heart. Margaret, my eldest daughter, you who I trusted with my care, my home, my finances, you took advantage of that trust in ways no mother should ever have to endure. A collective gasp rippled through the pews like the shudder of a strong wind. Margaret's face went pale, her hands clutching the wooden bench in front of her as if she might fall. George's jaw snapped shut, his eyes darting between Margaret and the priest, searching for an explanation. The priest's voice, unwavering, pressed on. You took the money I saved from selling my car. Money meant for my care, for emergencies, for peace of mind at the end. Rebecca, who sacrificed so much to ensure I was never left alone, she found out, but chose to keep it from me, to spare me pain in my last days. God bless you, Rebecca, for being such a loving daughter. The words sliced through the hush, each syllable a weight. I covered my mouth with trembling hands, tears spilling unchecked down my cheeks. She'd known. All this time I'd carried guilt, shame, fear that I'd failed her, when really I'd been trying to shield her from hurt. She'd been the one carrying the burden, choosing silence, choosing dignity over confrontation. The priest continued, his voice clear and measured, even as the air in the church grew heavy. Margaret, you emptied my bank account, and with it, you drained what was left of my energy, leaving me with nothing but your absence and excuses. I kept quiet because I did not want to shame you or cause more pain, but people deserve to know the truth. The congregation sat stunned, shock and disbelief etched into every face. Margaret seemed to shrink in her seat, her bravado evaporating. George shifted uneasily, his usual self-confidence replaced by uncertainty and embarrassment. For a moment I was motionless, paralyzed by the weight of revelation. My tears flowed for Mom, for the truth she'd harbored alone, for the love and strength it took to leave these words as her legacy. Grief warred with relief inside me, relief that my silence hadn't been cowardice, but a kindness and rage that Margaret's betrayal had stolen both our peace. Then Margaret snapped. She shot to her feet, the scrape of the bench jarring against the quiet. Her voice when it came was jagged and raw. This is absurd, she spat, her words tumbling out in panic and fury. She was sick. She didn't know what she was saying. I did everything for her. Everything! And this is the thanks I get? Murmurs erupted around us, people shifting uncomfortably, their eyes filling with accusation, pity, or just plain horror. George tried to grab her arm, but she shook him off with a violent jerk. You have no idea what I went through, she cried, her voice rising, desperation shadowing her face. I was under so much stress. I only took what I needed for the house, for both of us. The priest's calm broke, his next words sharp as a slap. That's enough, Margaret. This is not the time to defend yourself. Your mother's words stand as they are. Margaret glared at him, then turned her fury on me, her eyes blazing with shame and rage. In that moment I saw her, the sister I'd grown up with, the rival, the stranger, laid bare beneath the weight of truth. Around us, people stared, their judgment ringing louder than any words. I sat shaking, tears still streaming. They weren't only for Mom, or for the truth finally spoken. They were for everything left unsaid, all the silent sacrifices, and the impossible strength it must have taken for her to let go with grace, leaving her story behind so neither Margaret nor I could erase it. My heart ached with grief and gratitude, and finally a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth would set us both free. I hope you're happy, she spat, her voice echoing sharply in the vaulted space, then stormed out of the church, heels clacking an angry staccato on the polished floor. George hesitated, uncertain, his face a mixture of embarrassment and confusion as he shuffled after her, shoulders hunched, looking utterly lost. The heavy doors slammed shut behind them with a resounding finality, and for a heartbeat, it was as if the entire sanctuary trembled from the force of it. I just sat there, rooted to my pew, stunned into silence, my hands knotted in my lap. The air felt charged, rippling with the tension that Margaret's outburst had left behind. All around me, people began to whisper, their voices rising and falling in uneasy waves. Some expressions in the crowd flickered with genuine sympathy, eyes soft and understanding, while others exchanged glances edged with judgment or curiosity, as if Margaret had finally said aloud the things they'd only dared to think. It was as though the carefully woven fabric of our family's reputation had finally unraveled before them, and nobody quite knew how to look at me now. Behind me, Laura had been quietly observing the scene from a few rows back. She made her way forward, her step steady, presence calm. She reached out and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Rebecca," she said, her voice a gentle anchor amid the chaos. "Your mom saw you for who you are. She knew right to the end that you were the one who stood by her, no matter what." The sincerity in her tone was like a balm, and I nodded, barely able to speak as I fought to swallow the painful lump growing in my throat. For so long, I'd carried a secret weight, trying to shield Mom from truths too heavy to bear, convinced it was my job to protect her. But Mom's letter, with its clear, unwavering love, had shown me she'd never been fooled or fragile. She'd known everything, even the parts I'd tried so hard to hide. And in her final days, she had chosen, once again, to protect me instead. As the service drew to a close, the congregation slowly drifted out, the sound of footsteps and murmured condolences filling the space left by Margaret's dramatic exit. Many paused to offer their sympathy, and I sensed something different in their voices, no longer just polite obligation, but a softer, more genuine respect. Perhaps now, stripped of pretense, the truth was easier for them to acknowledge. Margaret's carefully maintained mask had fallen away, and with it, the illusion of her control. I could see it in the way people looked at me now, a shift, subtle but unmistakable. They finally saw me not just as the dutiful daughter, but as someone who had endured and survived. I sat quietly as the sanctuary emptied, uncertain what the future might hold. I didn't know what would become of Margaret, or of George, or even of myself. The foundations I'd relied on, all the unspoken rules and roles, suddenly felt unstable. But through the uncertainty, I clung to one unshakable truth. Mom's voice, preserved in that letter, had granted me a kind of closure I'd never dared to hope for. For the first time, I felt released from the old burdens, the secrets, and the endless cycle of trying to fix what was broken. That night, back in my tiny apartment, the silence felt different, less suffocating, almost gentle. I sat alone on the edge of my bed and pulled out the picture of Mom I'd brought home from the service. Her smile, warm and knowing, gazed back at me from the frame. "Thank you," I whispered, pressing the photo close to my chest. In that quiet moment, the sharp ache inside me softened, replaced by a fragile but unmistakable sense of peace. For so long, Margaret's betrayal had overshadowed everything, But Mom's love, steady, fierce, and honest, was bigger than all the pain. It stretched beyond the grave, wrapping around me even now, and I realized that in the end, that love was the one truth I could trust. It was enough. It would be enough to keep me moving forward, one day at a time.